I'm Marcia Fritz, and my mother was Elgene Loopy Huffman. Her father was Bus Loopy, who was the son of Rudolph Loopy and Sarah Voley. And Sarah Voley was my great-great-grandmother, and she was born in the home behind me. Yeah, this is where our family basically started in the early days in the 1800s, and to have the tradition of family get-togethers continued this long, this many generations. Our families that married together, the Voleys and the Loopys, were both very family-oriented, and they started the tradition of having these annual picnics to bring the family together. This is only part of the family. It's just one strain of the family. It's one of Rudolph and Sarah's sons, Rudolph Loopy. I kind of got that messed up. Rudolph Loopy was one of their sons, and he carried on the tradition of, with his kids, of family picnics. And so it's great to come back to the historical side of where we started. It used to be, years ago, my first remembrances of the Rush home were these family picnics when the park was very early being established. I remember half of the area wasn't even lawn area. It was a lot of weeds, a big creek, almost a wild creek. It seemed big to me because I was maybe 3 or 4, but first place I ever recall having a tadpole was here. The first place I ever jumped off a high board was in the pool when it was built here. So I had a lot of really good memories of Rush Park and how it was evolved. It sort of grew up as I grew up, and I just have really good memories. My first ice cream, my first cream puff, my first sip of beer, cold beer ever was here. My dad gave me a little bit, and I thought, oh my gosh, I didn't like the taste of it. So yeah, a lot of firsts here. Yeah, I'm finding out that just from looking at pictures that my grandfather planted almonds when he purchased property in Citrus Heights, and he and his father actually started the Almond Growers Association as a way to market their nuts, to get the farmers together. They actually formed a co-op. And my grandfather became one of their early managers when he started farming. He would farm part of the year, and then the other part of the year he'd manage the shelling processing plant down in Sacramento. So I know for sure almonds were here, wheat, horses. They raised horses. A lot of the grain crops they grew so that they could feed to their animals that they had. They had a lot of chickens were big, turkeys, cows for milk. Everything they did was canning, their own milk, eggs, and then they'd have their meat from the chickens. They did it all by hand, and it was a very long ride to Sacramento. I've read my mother's diary of those long trips she'd take with her mother to go to Sacramento to get the things that they didn't get here, and it was literally all day. And they would go out in the middle of the summer. Usually they had what they called Community Day. They'd also call it Road Day, where they'd get all of the volunteers here together that lived around here and actually fix the roads to Sacramento before they were paved, and some of the side roads, so that they could keep them up to date so that they could all pass it. So it's really a community effort. We didn't have the road crew like we have right now. We didn't have highway funds, but they did pave Auburn early on, but none of the other roads around here were paved in the days that my mother was growing up. Oh, let's see. Well, they made their own. I know my mother and my mother became a very good seamstress. My grandmother made all of their clothes. If you look at the pictures of my mother and her grammar school class, you can tell that all of their clothes are homemade. I think the men, wore overalls that they bought from town, that they would wear them every day, but the women, their dresses, they had to get the fabric and sew it, and everybody had a sewing machine. So it was pretty, I'll tell you, it was pretty plain, but it was a rich, I'm gonna cry. It was a very rich life, in spite of having so little, because they all worked together as a community, and they all made what they had go as far as they could, but still enjoy life. You know, the highlight was going to a dance at the community center, and having candles at night. You know, they would live in the daylight. They didn't have electricity. And my mother, when she was growing up, didn't have a toilet. In the country, they didn't have toilets. They had to go to the outhouse. And they and one of the luxuries when they finally sold their home here and moved out to Natomas and built another home was carpeting. You know, it was like, it was amazing that they had carpeting, and in that they didn't have refrigeration. They didn't have any of that. They had running water only because they would pump the water into a tank and have it flow through their house.
Do you have any recollection of your parents or grandparents or great-grandparents talking about when Fred and Julia Voley came across the plains to California?
They didn't talk about that. My grandfather, thankfully, before he died, put together a history book, but he put it together in writing. He only had a 7th grade education. He had to go work on the farm after he left Sylvan School, and I don't even think he went all the way through Sylvan School. I know at 7th grade he left, but he was able to write down the history. So they never really told us about it. It was you know, they were always looking ahead, you know, not looking back and reminiscing, but they were always building on what they had, and they learned so much, and they taught all of us their values. All went through the family. The whole growing up, it was never even questioned that you would do the best thing you could do for yourself and your family, always, because of that inspiration.